So put your old hat on. You've taken a look at this budget, and we're going to find out about 11 o'clock this morning what the current CBO thinks. What things would you be taking a particularly hard look at in the budget that's been proposed?
Well, one problem that CBO faces is that the budget was very vague on some crucial aspects of policy, like the tax reform that the administration intends to pursue. So CBO can't really do the full analysis it would like to do because the administration hasn't spelled out its policies. The second issue, one you mentioned, which is that there was a basic double counting in the budget proposal in which this unspecified tax reform was predicted to increase economic growth enough to pay for itself, but then to separately raise economic growth in a different way to somehow raise even more revenue. That's a double counting that CBO will not make the mistake of repeating. So those are some of the key aspects of what we will see, I think, later today.
So Doug, explain to those of us who haven't followed the CBO as closely. When the CBO gets a budget and the president says we're going to have tax reform, do they have to take that at face value and say there will be tax reform, or do they take into account the difficulties right now that we're seeing politically about getting anything through?
CBO does not try to predict the political outcomes. It tries to analyze the effects of the revenue and spending policies that the president puts forward, and CBO does this every year. It's especially important this year, though, because the budget included this odd double counting mistake and because the budget was based on absurdly optimistic economic assumptions. So CBO is providing an objective, independent read of the president's policies, not trying to predict what the Congress will do as it considers those proposals.
Well, as you said, absurdly unrealistic economic assumptions, especially about growth, as I understand it, about the likelihood of GDP growth of the magnitude they're talking about. Assuming that they get through the tax reform they've talked about and things like that, what is a more realistic number, and what does that do to the budget overall?
Economic growth in this country over the next 5 or 10 years is likely to average about 2%. And that is, in fact, well below the rates of growth we were used to in the 1970s and 80s and 90s. But the primary reason for that is the demographic change. The baby boomers are now moving into retirement, so they're coming out of the labor force. And women's surge into the labor force is not going to be repeated again. So those demographic factors mean that our labor force will grow about 1 percentage point per year more slowly in the next decade than it did in the past. And that taking off that 1 percentage point is what takes down economic growth from around 3% that we've had before to around 2% looking ahead.